Welcome to episode number 6 of the Veto, and I feel like this is probably one of the most exciting weeks or a few weeks in CS we've had for a while. So many roster changes, end of Pro League, so many topics to discuss. I'm here with Wolfie, and what we had yesterday was the Pro League finals between Gambit and Heroic, two of the, surprise packages of this sort of period of the year so far. So let's just fly straight into this grand final. Best of 5. I think it was a 5-mapper. Some epic games in there. Pretty long, some of those. So tell me, how do you reflect on this final? Did it live up to the hype of these teams?
Well, I think the first point to bring up is that in my mind, it's the first good best of 5 final we've had in a while. I've sort of never really been convinced by best of 5s. It feels like a lot of the time you get these 3-1s where you probably could have sorted it in a best of 3 and then it's just one more map to absolutely secure it and nail it down. This one actually going the distance, Heroic really having a fight and struggle their way through their own maps. Obviously, you've got single overtime on Inferno, you've got quad overtime on Train, and then to come out with that utterly dominant Mirage performance to seal the deal. It definitely felt like almost the first real advertisement for a best of 5 final format that I've seen of late, and it felt like it definitely lived up to the hype. And then, I mean, there's so many storylines with this final, right? I think we're going to have to sort of rattle through them as well as we can. So you start things with Inferno. It's a very hotly contested map. Gambit look like they're firing on all cylinders. Heroic looking like they're struggling. You look at an 11-4 half for Gambit, CT side of Inferno, and you're going, oh shit, this game's done, right? This game's over. They've smashed them on their map pick. It's just going to go from bad to worse to worse. And then Heroic somehow come back with an equally dominant CT side. Gambit have been a side who we've watched their T sides for a long time, and they've looked very well drilled, very impressive, and they've always looked like they've had backup plans upon backup plans, right? If plan A ain't working, Hobbit's got plan B. If plan B doesn't work, he's got plan C, and they've always eventually found the way to crack into a CT defense and the way they can unpick a map. That didn't happen. They got it once, Heroic plugged the hole. They got it again, Heroic found another way to plug the hole, and they just kept coming back at them. So we got that absolute banger, and you're like, okay, this series has got legs. And then Gambit 16-3 Heroic on fucking Vertigo. Now, you can write Vertigo off sometimes, right? You can look at Vertigo and you can go, it's a pug map. Gambit, some very talented individuals. Hobbit's playing, well, pretty much the series of his life in this final. You got Shiro popping on all cylinders. Nafany's there. Axial's there. I think Inters was the only player that I'd maybe look at and go, he's a little bit quiet, but obviously he's a support player, so that's his job, right? Be quiet, get the critical kills when they matter. And then Heroic just weren't there at all. I'm looking at the stats now. Nobody got a positive KD. Nobody even managed to draw level. Top kills is 10 on a few players. They just weren't in the map at all. It really made me wonder if they've even practiced it. It just looked... It's weird because I say that about Vertigo with a lot of teams, and it definitely feels like a good team can make an all-right Vertigo team look embarrassing. We see it with Mouse Sports, especially. They play Vertigo to a standard where it makes it look like, I'm arcing back to the Ents matchup. They just made Ents look like they never play Vertigo. They just were that proficient on it. And I think that was, to a certain extent, the case with Gambit. So we write off Vertigo. We go, okay, Gambit, their map pick, Heroic, meh. And then we get to Train. And Train is, I think, for me, where we get the first indications, right, of what this series can and will eventually end up being, because it's a fucking behemoth of a map, right? I think in the end, they play essentially 2 maps worth of rounds to get the eventual 28-26 win on Heroic. And it was just insane for anybody who didn't watch it live. The amount of clutches, the amount of huge individual plays, the amount of counter-stratting and then counter-stratting when you got into OT, and you could see Heroic, especially on their T side, toying with Gambit and going, we threw this in regulation, so we're going to throw it like we're going, and then loop back again. That's the first fake. And then they go the other way again. I think there was one particular round where they ended up throwing 3 fakes in a single round just to try and draw CT rotations, just to try and get that one pick to get them into a site. And it just kept going and going and going, and it would get into these impossible situations. You'd have Gambit like 2v4 on the A site trying to retake CT side, and Shiro would pop up. Hobbit would come out with a double spray down out of literally nowhere. Shiro would there's one round where he gets a nutty flank with a deagle, drops bomb, then gets a collateral double spray down. It was just like someone had taken every great moment in the entirety of Pro League and gone, we're going to cram it into one map. We're going to get it done all on train. You're going to have all of the hype, all of the excitement in the world. I mean, for you, it must be fucking nightmare fuel, because at that point, analysis just goes out the window, right? It's just...
I demo reviewed that game today.
Oh, seriously? What did you think?
That train game. Well, I always have a thing where, like, if it goes OT, I don't demo review the OT, because, like, especially for this game. So even though they didn't quite reach, 60 rounds, because obviously in overtime they're all buy rounds. This is longer than 2 games. This is fucking like a joke how long this game is. And like it gets to the point where like you just handshake and call it a draw and go on to overpass. It's just ridiculous. I also was watching the Vertigo game earlier. That was a weird one, because like that was just a game where nothing heroic did work. Very, very proactive team on the CT side. They like to call into different areas of the map, take small risks, and every risk they took was wrong. Every gamble they took was wrong. Every site they stacked was wrong, and they were down like 4v5 so many rounds because Nafany was just like running in A ramp and just headshotting everyone he could see. So he was a pain in the ass for them on the CT side of Vertigo, but they get through the series in the end after that train behemoth, and then of course end of Mirage, Cadian. 1v4, knife, shot through triple, and then kill the last one around Tetris. That was ridiculous. So overall, the series was pretty mental, I have to say. Don't want to be too much of a downer, but even a series like this doesn't prove to me best of fives are a great idea. Because even though we had some good maps here, like the series just was so long. It's like ridiculously long. Much longer than my attention span was the length for this one. I understand why the tournament does it. They want, a whole day to be their big marquee series. They want good viewership numbers. But I just think best of threes make for better series. They're good length. Maybe even best of threes are a bit long. That's a debate for a different day. But this was incredibly long. Gambit got it done in the end, and no, Gambit are just the story at the moment, aren't they? They're just the fucking bee's knees right now. Are the are the Nafany crew?
Allan, Gambit didn't get it done.
Fuck. I meant to say heroic. It's not gone well. Edit that out.
Oh man, yeah, right.
They almost got it done if they got that train shit over the line. Actually, I think Gambit were the better team in this series overall. 2 maps, they lost 2 maps. They went to OT where they both of them had times in commanding positions. So they'll be pretty pissed off if they lost this. And that final round of Mirage was probably the kicker.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, right. I'm going to have the best of 5 discussion because I think it's worth having this talk now with this series, because the thing is, everybody's going to say best of 5s are fucking amazing because you got the big Cadian clutch at the end, right? If we ignore the Cadian clutch, I know that's difficult to do, but if you say that didn't happen and Mirage ended, not in that round, but the next one, 16-7, that last map was shit. You look at the first 3, right? We had Scrappy Inferno goes to OT, Gambit pull off the big gotcha on Vertigo, and then the Behemoth train. If you end that series on the Behemoth train, that is a fucking incredible final, right? Last map, quad overtime. I mean, there was ninja diffusers, there was all kinds of crap going on. It would have made, an insane finisher. And I think what then started to happen is you just see fatigue set in a little bit, right? You've had these close, intense maps, then Overpass, which we've really glanced over, was 16-10 in favor of Gambit. Heroic. T-side just looked flat to me, if I'm being really blunt. They only got 3 rounds across on it. It seemed like nothing was working. Gambit are a very good Overpass team, do not get me wrong, but given how the series had gone, I expected a little bit more. And then on Mirage, for me at the very least, you're in the 5th map of a best of 5. You've played 6.5 maps worth of CS by the time you get here in all reality. Gambit looked tired. They've not been here before. They've not played a best of 5 series that's gone all the way before. They looked shattered. They were not playing the same brand of CS they've been playing in the first 3 maps, even the first 4 maps. There were sloppy mistakes. There were missed shots. If we're going to go to the 1v4, the first thing I saw on Twitter afterwards is you should always be jiggle peeking your corners in a 1vx situation. And if they are jiggling all of those corners, he does not get 4 kills. It's simple as that, right? Shiro's jiggling. He's a little more awkward to knife. Someone swings Palace, bangs Kyogin in the head. Or you've got the triple player jiggling along with the guy who swings Sandwich. It's a double peek. It's a straight trade. It's simple Counter-Strike. And I just think that because we're this late into the day, we've played this many rounds of CS, the players are no longer at that, that peak level. They've been playing for 7 hours. They're starting to drop down the gears. They're still giving it everything they've got, don't get me wrong, but they've probably not eaten very much because the breaks between the maps, I think the first time we got a proper break was at the end of map 3. So they're probably hungry. They're probably thirsty. They're tired because they don't normally play this much CS consecutively against the same fucking team, which I think is another point to raise, right? It's mentally challenging enough to play, 2 best of 3s against 2 different teams. When you're trying to anti-strat the same team for 5 consecutive maps that go 7 hours, the amount of mental strain there is just immense. And then you get to this last map, and I'm going, oh, damn, Gambit, they should be able to really put up a fight here. We're probably going to get an incredible last map to the series. This is going to be great. And they put up 2 T-sided rounds. And I don't want to take anything away from Heroic CT side because it was a shutout. It looked very good across the board. But I think if you get Mirage as the ender of a best of 3, Gambit take it to overtime at the very least, if not winning it, in my personal opinion. I think Gambit can take those kind of maps, right? And if they're not as mentally exhausted, if they've not played as much CS, if they've not just been sat in their chairs for 7 hours straight, trying to concentrate to the maximum they can, it's probably a very different story. And obviously, I don't want to take anything away from Cadian's clutch because it was fucking immense. The casting from Machine and Sponge was just next level. The joke about how, have you heard the story of the Cadian 1v4 that they have been running for the entirety of Pro League and it has not once worked out. And then in the grand final to win fucking Pro League, it works out. Machine loses his shit. It is like the perfect culmination. You've got the Cadian redemption arc, which we'll go on to. It's the perfect way to end. But I think Train could have also been the perfect way to end. And in my mind, it would have been, without that clutch, notwithstanding the insane clutch, the better way to finish.
Agreed. Yeah. Just in terms of for the players themselves, like, I know from coaching teams that in general, like a long best of 3, that's a lot. Especially with it's not the tournament's fault, but like you can't realistically have that long breaks between maps. You just lose the viewership. So it can never be that long. So you can't ever have a full on break and actually really walk away from your PC and actually reset. It's like you're just going straight back in there. And especially for this series, imagine the amount of like adrenaline that would be in them in the Train game when that was going close.
Yeah.
Even Inferno when that was going closer. By the Mirage point, it's just a game of, staying in there at that point. And that's kind of my problem with best of 5s, is that they rarely hit a big crescendo at the end of the maps, because it's always like this sort of scenario. I've very rarely seen what you'd normally get on a best of 3 when the third map goes close, then all the adrenaline comes out. And then if that goes to overtime, then, okay, it's going to be a bit sloppy, but it's still going to look like Counter-Strike. And this series was so long that I even forgot who won the damn thing. So that's gone well. So that was the final. Very impressive final, very long final. And as much as we talk down best of 5s, this was the best advertisement for best of 5 for a while. And I don't imagine that will change in the near future. But talking kind of overall about Heroic and their storyline here, this was their first real event after the roster change. A roster change that some might have questioned. Considering that the team was still in pretty good form, at least in the top 10, that sort of level. And you always take a big risk when you make a roster change. This could equally have gone badly wrong. You just don't know until you get the players in the system. Bring the players in and works out magnificently. You can't ask for anything better. Winning the tournament first time around. They played a qualifier, I think, for one of them, but that doesn't really matter in comparison to a pro league. So that was very impressive. And in general, in terms of the roster move, the thing that excites me the most about this team now is that like the Stavin, Tezes, and Refresh kind of rifling core, they're so much more dynamic than kind of swap one of them out with Borup or Nico than that sort of team was. So they have so many more options. Play off the spawns more and get more aggressive. These players all love being proactive and calling around themselves. So it's come together super well. And someone like Shush is the perfect sort of player to just be a role player, sit back, round out the lineup, play some of the less desirable spots. And, you know, we'll talk about it now. If you want the Cadian redemption arc of coming, if you want to go way back, he had certainly very long periods back in the day when he was very much doubted as a cooler or even a secondary cooler on teams or just as an AWPer in general. And he struggled to stay in top teams and he can never get into the Astralises or whatever it would have been, North or way back like Copenhagen Wolves, these sort of teams. And to go the hard way here of having 4 younger players around him and he's calling the whole game and he's AWPing at the same time. Like, this guy deserves a lot more respect than he gets in the community. And the way he's built this team, and presumably has a lot to say in the players as well, is pretty sensational. So when's the conversation going to start? The Cadian really is one of the best leaders in the game at this point, to be honest, with how he's brought so many different parts together, so many young players, and he's AWPing at the same time, and they're playing a super proactive game, and they're playing 17-hour fucking best of 5s and still staying composed at the end. Like, what more could you ask for from Cadian at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I watched the Richard Lewis video that he chucked out around lunchtime today while I was on my lunch break at work, just about, you know, where Cadian's come from, all the things that have happened to him. And obviously, he was never originally particularly liked in the Danish scene. He was a little bit more of a partier than a fragger, shall we say. He liked his parties, he liked his lands, and then he basically flicked a switch and went, you know, I'm CS now, I'm going to go hard. And I think the thing that really surprises me, because we have been in the fucking pandemic for so long, it doesn't feel like a year ago that all the FPX shit went down, right? It feels to me like a very distant memory. You know, I look at it and I go, oh, that was forever ago. It wasn't. We're talking near enough 12 months to the day. He's just turned down a Pro League invite. They've been told they're going to be signed to Fun Plus Phoenix to go and play in, you know, Flashpoint 1, which at the time, obviously, you know, it went a little bit south. I won't make you comment on that because you're working.
I wasn't
Flashpoint
there.
now.
I don't care.
But at the time, it was the big marquee, right? It was the challenger for Pro League. It was going to be the big event, the huge prize pool, bigger than anything we'd really seen in CS in a long time. And then they turn up, and Astralis go, but we want to buy. Was it Snappy? Yeah, it was Snappy. We want to buy Snappy. And
no, it was the S-Tag transfer.
S-Tag? Was it S-Tag?
I'm pretty sure.
Fucking hell. It again feels like years ago. It's ridiculous. But then FunBus basically go, we don't want 4/5 of a roster. It was S-Tag, you're right, because he had some 6-month bullshit. We don't want 4/5 of a roster. We want the entire roster or nothing. So you've got Cadian and this team that he's been working with, building up. You know, they've started to get these impressive results on the board. They fly to LA in the middle of the start of a fucking pandemic, just like with so much uncertainty around, you know, this was the time where we didn't know when countries were going to lock shit down. We didn't know if players who were flying to LA were going to be able to fly back home or whether they were just going to be stuck. So it was a huge risk to go out there, and they wanted to do it. They wanted to compete. Cadian, in my mind, is one of the most emotionally driven players. It's the ones who we see it. He wears his heart on his sleeve, right? You see it in everything. He screams when he wins. He looks visibly distraught when he loses. And then they get there, and FunBus go, "No, we're not buying the roster." And they end up buying an NA core. I think it was old Bad News Bears, because I think Peter was playing for a bit. And he obviously, you know, he puts out that video, which it's on Twitter if you want to go and find it. You know, he's talking very from the heart. In my mind, it's not something we get a lot of in CS. A lot of players are very closed off. They'll give their yes, no answers at interviews, and then that's it. He's very passionate. Clearly, he's going, "This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I've just gone for my big break as an IGL, and it's gone down the shitter. You know, Heroic have sold S-Tag, we think it is, we hope it is, to Astralis, and it's completely fucked our transfer. This is shit. What am I going to do?" Take 12 months from that. He's back with Heroic. He's crafted a roster that believe in his calling, I think, more than anything he has had to this point, right? Almost the perk of picking up the Shush, the Refresh, even the Stound and the Tesses, relatively young players who trust him. And you can see they trust him in the way they play. They are willing to take peaks they wouldn't necessarily take before. They play with confidence, they play aggressively, and it's because they think that his call is going to win them the round more times than not. And that's not something he really seemed to have on even the North iteration or the first round of Heroic. It never felt like the players behind him were like, yeah, I'm fully bought into this. I'm going to do whatever you say, even if, you know, I mean, my stats are going to be shit for a game because I have to play a crap position, or I have to get aggressive for information and I'm going to get traded more often than not. And my stats are going to look crap, but we'll win the game. And now he's got that trust behind him. He's got a system that works with him. He's playing arguably the best AWPing of the online era. Almost certainly, for my money, the best in-game leading, especially in this best of 5 of the online era so far. And he's got players who are playing lights out next to him. You know, he's got Refresh starting to feel like he's coming back into his old form. I don't think he's there yet. I think he's got more to give, but Cadian is getting it back out of him. You know, we talk about Refresh and we go, what if? He's always been a what if player. He's had these amazing streaks and then never quite landed the consistency behind them. Cadian seems to be getting that out of him. He seems to be getting the most out of every player around him and getting the most out of himself as well. I think there is no player in the CS scene right now who was more deserving of that big clutch moment, right? That big hero play after all the shit he's gone through in the online era and even before that. There was nobody better to clutch it up, because as much as every player winning a big 1v4 to win Pro League would have gone mental, I think Cadian takes it up to 11, right? The camera shots of him just fucking screaming, followed by jumping up. You know, you could see how much it meant to him, more for my money than anybody else in the online era. You know, we see it so often with online CS. They palm it off. It's only online. It's not on LAN. When we get to LAN, it'll be different. Cadian doesn't give a shit. This is now. This is playing what's in front of him. And he's just won fucking Pro League. So he's going to go mental. He is clearly over the moon. And then he's human as well. Did you watch the interview afterwards?
No, I didn't watch it.
It was fucking great. So he's got the knife kill. He's dropped down bottom stairs with the AWP. And then he goes, pause the video here. I accidentally opened my console because I was shitting myself. Then closes the console, AWP, wallbang, plays out Nathany, gets the fourth. Like, just that little bit of humanization in the final interview. It was honestly just the complete package for me.
Actually hilarious. Opens his console back because he's just slamming his keyboard randomly. Yeah. Cadian's storyline is, I haven't actually thought about it that much until today, about kind of his progression as a player. And he had a period where it felt like he was destined to make a move to broadcasting because it just suited him a lot better. And he obviously didn't have to rely on, a team buying into him. He could just do his own stuff, and he could still go to all the events and be a part of it. So even from that perspective, I was a bit surprised he came back to playing so hard. And then I'm trying to remember when he was calling for North. I'm trying to remember what I thought their problems were. I think Cadian right now is a much more well-rounded leader. I think he's a better leader of people. I think at that time in North, as you kind of mentioned, he couldn't get some of those players to buy into the way he wanted to call. I mean, I specifically asked Valde in an interview once about some of these topics, and it's pretty obvious that just didn't mesh with how they wanted to play the game. And I think Cadian potentially has a style of calling where it can get a bit mad sometimes. He likes to throw in loads of small things. I think he likes to give the players a lot of space, and he kind of assumes that they're just going to fill in the gaps when he's calling stuff. And maybe if everyone's not buying into that, it just falls apart. So maybe that's what went wrong back in the day. But with this lineup and the lineup before, let's not forget the Cologne win. Okay, they might have had some Hunden things there, but irrespective, they did win the tournament, and he made both rosters work, both a similar sort of scenario with the sort of players they had. And it's rare you see an example like this where, Cadian is by far and away the most experienced player on this team. There's no secondary voice to help these players develop, especially now with all the coaching changes and all of that sort of stuff. It really is just Cadian. It's not like other teams. It's not like they've got a Zonic behind them. It's not like they've got players like Dupree and Device that have played at the top level for whatever it's been, 6, 7, 8 years to help round out the team. you have to credit Cadian with the vast majority of how this kind of overall system is built. And I will be interested to see how it transfers to LAN when we eventually get back. I do think the way they play, to not get super in depth, they're just like ultra proactive on both sides. They like to, they're not a team that likes to sit back and, you know, play the standard game and just play out rounds. They like to get aggressive. They like to go for the information play. They like to stack this side of the map they've got to read. When that works, it's fucking phenomenal when they can just mow down teams. When it doesn't work, it looks a bit stupid because like you're just calling yourself. It's like the exactly what I'm on Vertigo. They're just like calling themselves into the wrong sites. It's a very hard style to pull off, at least to the degree they are. And I'll be very interested to see in the future if they can pull this off, because if they make it work, this could really be a serious team, like a serious like take on when we get back to LAN and full practice, full going. And this could take on a Na'Vi, an Astralis of informed Vitality, informed Liquid for that matter. They're really informed. So Heroic, obviously extremely impressive in this tournament. Very good for them. Gambit, second place. Hardly be disappointed, I'd say, overall with their run. At the end of the day, looked great in the groups. Smashed Astralis in that play-in game. I was watching that one a couple of days ago as well. And I'll just talk quickly about Astralis and how they came out of this tournament. So Astralis are great in the groups after the EG game, at least. Looked pretty good form. And then it felt like, okay, are Astralis back? Can they win the tournament? Can they get through this, whatever, this weird play-in system and get into a good place in the playoffs? And I was watching them, and I think they got unlucky in the sense that I think Gambit and Fury have got very good matchups against them, because they both play a bit like Heroic, but to like a larger extreme where it's more like the individuals going for plays, and they're very reactive, and you know they're very fast, and the players aren't scared to take duels and swing angles and like go for individual plays if they think they want to go for it. When you're a team like Astralis and you're going through your head, you're trying to make the high percentage play, you're trying to make the good call. They're getting red all over the place. They're getting flanked. Like players are swinging out everywhere, and I can just tell. I can guarantee you, like in the comms, someone like Glave's like, "What the fuck are they doing? Like this guy's just like swinging and like random." There's like I remember around there on playing on Overpass versus Gambit, and like they're T side. They're walking up connector, and then Hobbit just like swings for no reason and just domes two of them. And like that's a scenario where I guarantee you in the comments for Stratus, like, what is he doing? And it's like, because if you play the game by the book, you shouldn't just be swinging random angles and going for frags, but it works in that scenario, and those sort of things catch Astralis off guard. So Astralis had a lot of problems against those styles. I don't know how they're going to change it up in the future, but going back to Gambit, that's how they like to play. They like to play a bit individually aggressive. They throw in the small plays. They like playing a bit contact heavy on T side, and it seems to be working. And there's a legitimate case at the moment that Gambit might be the best team in the world when you combine this with Katowice and with the other top teams, the Na'Vis, the Astralis, Vitality, Liquid, maybe a little bit in flux in terms of their form at the moment. So what do you kind of make of Gambit overall as a team at the moment? Is there a legitimate case for them to be the world's best right now?
For my money, yeah. For my money, they probably are currently the best team in the world. I think the results, the way they've backed them up, and even more importantly, the way they have beaten a variety of teams now, right? When you look to Katowice, it's like, okay, you've taken down some pretty big scalps here. You've made the miracle run. But I think everyone was a little nervous because we've seen it before. We saw it with a Vanguard, right? They go through, they win a fucking major, and then it's just shit. It falls off a cliff. QBF, magical run through the groups, doesn't happen in playoffs. So I think everybody was sort of sat there going, is this another CIS masterpiece, one event hero run? It falls apart at the seams immediately thereafter. So to get through to the finals of Pro League, absolutely huge for them. It really does cement their legitimacy. And then you look at some of the teams they beat, right? They top their group, beating Furia. I think Furia and Gambit have quite a clash of styles because they both play, as you said, that aggressive, proactive CS. And when you do get those clashes, it gets very fucking messy, and there is a whole lot of room for it to fall apart at the seams. That doesn't happen. Taking out Na'Vi, obviously, Na'Vi's form as sort of comes and goes. As you said, they're in flux at the moment. It feels like they're trying to work out what they want to do. Obviously, there's been a recent announcement that Bit's going to be over Flamey in the RMR events, and I feel like that is them feeling out what they want to do here and then going, okay, yeah, Flamey's not cutting the jib anymore. We're going to bring Bit in more seriously. But then you go through, and as you said, dominating Astralis in the play-ins, right? Getting themselves that semi-final spot. dominating NIP, who I think as much as you can write it off as, this is a young NIP roster, they've not been together that long, they've not necessarily lit the world on fire, and they have had dodgy series, but this is a NIP who've taken out the likes of Complexity to get here and have been a consistent dark horse, is what I want to say at this point, right? They're not a team you look at and go, we're going to win the whole fucking thing, but they're a team who are capable of taking big scalps. So getting past them is important. And then they bring out two of the strongest maps against Heroic that I think anyone has had against Heroic in a little while, right? Utterly dominant on Vertigo, even though, as you said, Heroic just called their shit wrong. It just didn't work. Everything fell apart at the seams. Then they have a great overpass as well. I think you can't take away from that fourth map as much as they do. As you said, contact heavy, lots of gotcha plays. It works, and nobody's worked out how to counter it yet, so you can't knock it, right? If there's no counter and it continues to work for you, it's no longer a gotcha play. It's a strategy that nobody has found out a good counter for yet. So they bring out two incredibly strong maps, and I think end of the day, a little bit cheated by the best of 5 format. Definitely felt like they just went off a cliff for the 5th. And also that experience of Heroic. I think these are two very young rosters in the sounding of things. You're talking about Cadian, the only real voice on that roster. I think you can draw parallels to Hobbit over on the Gambit side of things. There's just, if for my money, a little bit more there on Heroic in terms of the experience, in terms of the events played, in terms of the teams beaten. There's a little more for the Tesses of the world, even the refreshers, the Shoosh. Obviously, Shoosh was there for Mad Lions when they win Flashpoint. They know how to win games, right? They know how to win big games. They know what it feels like, especially in the likes of Shoosh, to be in the final of a major event and win it. They know how to get those games over the line when the cards are down and when you're playing that scrappy, rough style of CS to try and just win it out, right? You're just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think at the end of the day, that was what got Heroic over the line, certainly on Inferno, definitely on Train. When you're in Quad OT, nothing matters anymore. I mean, you said you don't even watch the demos. Yeah, nothing matters. It's literally just what experience have you got? How used are you to being in crunch situations? And for that money, Heroic have just got a little bit more, right? They've got a little extra in the tank. They've got a little more experience behind them, just a little more time. And that's all they really seem to need. But don't take anything away from Gambit, because, this is a roster who I think on the Veto 2, you said, oh yeah, in a year, they could be a really impressive roster. They have hit the fast forward button, become, for my money at the moment, the best team in the world inside of 3 months of us saying that. And they have accelerated to play Tier 1 CS to an incredible standard and to anti-strat the hell out of top 5 teams with relative ease very, very quickly.
It's also for Gambit, it's like as soon as they get into these big tournaments, they're in the finals and they're winning them.
Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't like they had a run-up. It was like Katowice was one of their first big tournaments, and this is probably one of their second or their third big tournaments. And they're immediately winning it. I mean, they looked fairly good in some of the Tier 2, Tier 3 events, but even then they didn't look this good. So whatever's happened, whether it's, just raw drive of getting into these big events, it just imagine their practice schedule is probably absolutely nuts. It's probably just ridiculous, how many games they're playing, probably a bit like Virtus Pro. So, but in general, for a team like Gambit, for teams like Virtus Pro, NIP to some extent, and Heroic, if we just had the standard run-of-the-mill top teams and we didn't have these teams, the scene would be so much more boring at the moment. And they're carrying the excitement for me in some of these tournaments, even in the way they're playing. It's these teams that are bringing the exciting stuff. It's these teams that are bringing all the new ideas for my money. And it's teams like Astralis that are watching VP. I think Astralis, from what I've seen, they've stolen some rounds from Virtus Pro, I'm pretty sure. And they're trying... In general, I think Astralis are trying to add so many things to their game at the moment to try and get over this hump and try and fix the problems. And it's probably the same for a lot of these other top teams. They're probably watching these Gambits, these Heroics, these Virtus Pros that seemingly come out of nowhere, beating them, winning the tournaments, running so many new rounds, so many small plays, so many different approaches to these maps they've never thought of. And even so to some extent, a team like FPX as well is another team. They just come out of nowhere and they're suddenly playing in these big tournaments. And yeah, it's exciting for me to see it's good turnover of teams now. And hopefully over the next few months, we can see some of these solidify themselves, some of the hallmark names get back up there, and hopefully in the future we can have a really solid, whatever, 8-team playoff sort of bracket. I mean, this bracket's a bit nuts with how it works. I mean, at the time, so we said on the last one that I said I wasn't a massive fan of the format and stuff, but having seen it play out, I really don't like how this playoff format works, and with some teams skipping rounds and no double limb, and it's all just a bit wacky. And then this weird play-in situation, I've never really seen anything like it. I don't know if it was a last-minute compromise because they couldn't get all the teams. I don't know why it's panned out like this, but yeah, hopefully in future tournaments with better formats, we can get super good teams up there, we can get loads of games, and it'll be sick. So good stuff from these new boys.
Yep.
Yes.
Very good. Right. Well, that's Pro League in a nutshell.
That's Pro League.
I think now we have to start talking roster shifts, right? I've completely forgotten. Honestly, I've completely forgotten what the first one we wanted to talk about was. Can you remember?
Can do the Vitality news today if you want. So
yeah, fuck it, let's do Vitality
to cue everyone in. It was announced that RpK, I believe after the showdown, which is this week, will be stepping down and will not be an active player anymore. And the player to replace him, I need to get this right, I think it's pronounced Kyogin. Kyogin. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but he's not a player I know terribly much about, to be honest. I think I've heard of him a couple of times, but in terms of this context of playing for a team of Vitality's caliber and replacing a player as experienced as RpK, no, I don't know much about him. So, at face value, tell me what you think of this move. Presumably it's a bit of a surprise to see someone like RpK going after he felt like such a core part of the team at this point.
Mm-hmm. Right, well, first things first, someone needs to hire Nato Safix as a fucking agent at this point, because basically Kyogin came on the radar because Nato retweeted a sick Deagle clutch of his and went, this guy's insane. And then people ran back he's been uploading videos for like a year, 2 years, and they just ran back and went, he's been insane for ages. Right, let's hire him. Exact same thing happened with Masuta, by the way, who also ended up at Vitality. So Nato really needs to start getting himself some agent money at this point because he can't sign to a top team for some fucking reason, but everyone else he tweets at can.
Should tweet about himself.
He should just tweet his own clips and then he'll blow up and end up on a fucking great team. But I don't know, man. I mean, it can't be a clash of styles. It can't be anything other than they've looked at RpK, gone, he's not fragging hard enough for his role. We need to swap him out, right? That's the only possible way. He is an incredibly loved player within the French scene. Apex came out with a really, strongly worded tweet about how much he loved playing with him all this time. We know Shox likes him as well. I have no doubt, he's been taking on a little bit of a mentor role with the youngsters when they've had them, with Nevera, bringing him into the scene and all of this. So it has to be a change for fragging. My concern is, obviously, immediately you look at it and you go, well, why the fuck do you let Nevera go? Nevera doesn't play RpK's roles whatsoever, so it doesn't make sense from that perspective. The argument I could see is Nevera knew the system. You're looking at now, 5 months till the major? And you're trying to integrate a player who, at best, has had tier 2 experience. I would argue not much above tier 3, right? He's been messing about in Heretics for a little bit. He's been in some French mixed teams. He's not been in a tier 1 setup against the best teams in the world and trying to learn the nuances of a full 7-map pool or a 6-map pool in Vitality's case, right? In 5 months to prep for a major run, which also includes, of course, the RMR events coming up where they need to get themselves enough points to actually get to the fucking major. So you've taken out a player who admittedly doesn't know all your maps, knows maybe 2 of the 6, and would have been a bit awkward in terms of roles. I don't know what role Kyogin plays. I really hope he plays an RpK-esque anchor, because if he doesn't, then this move for my money. Yeah, exactly. He's going to be shoehorned in if he doesn't play it, and if he doesn't, then this move makes literally 0 sense, because then you've gone from a player who knows your strats but doesn't play the role to a player who doesn't know your strats and doesn't play the role. So I hope he does slot in. He's going to have to, and I hope he plays it in his previous teams, because it's going to be an incredibly steep fucking learning curve for him, right? He's going to be dropped in to tier 1 CS playing against the best players in the world in an era of online CS. So maybe you can argue that it's going to be a little bit easier to integrate him that way. But This feels for me like a really, really goddamn bold move from Vitality. This is a throw of the dice and hoping to roll double sixes for my money, right? You're hoping that Kyogin slots in, he plays RPK's roles exactly as RPK does, but he gets more frags for his money, right? That's basically what you're saying at this point. We want him to slot in and frag harder than RPK does. And as much as RPK obviously isn't the star of the show, he plays his role incredibly well. You know, he's got so much experience, so much tenure. He offers a voice, you know, we talk about it all the time on this podcast, a vocal player in the system. He's got the experience, he's been there, he's done it, he's won it, he's lost it. I couldn't think of a better, more experienced player you'd want to be leading you. Obviously, Apex is leading, but behind your leader going into a major. I don't know, man. For me, Vitality have rolled the dice on this, and if it backfires, I think it's going to end up backfiring pretty damn spectacularly.
Yeah, so actually when they announced this, there was like a short, but there was a gap between RpK being announced out and then the replacement being announced. So I spent that period of time wondering who on earth they were going to sign to replace him, and my immediate assumption was they're going to bring back one of the older players, maybe not Kiyoshima, but someone in that sort of vein to replace, to make this change. And that's what I kind of foresee in my head. I was thinking about loads of different options, like had the fucking board out and pitting things up, thinking about how this is going to work. And they announced this move. So if you haven't watched it, Apex went on HLTV confirmed last week and talked a bit about RPK. And from what Apex said, RPK in the game isn't anything like you'd imagine from the outside, because you imagine older player, super experienced, he must know all his stuff, he must be a vocal player, he must be a really big part of the leadership core. And from what Apex is saying, it's the opposite. It's like RPK just plays his spots, he plays his roles. Okay. You have to show him all the nades. That's what Apex was saying, is like he's really bad for like knowing nades and all this sort of stuff. So you have to talk him through everything. And like he's not someone that comes up with his own stuff. So in that sense, you can imagine potentially it's an issue where they're like, we need to have a whole team of proactive players. We need to have a whole team of players bringing ideas and be able to take initiative. And maybe RPK wasn't that sort of player for them. And they felt like this is a hole to their game they could improve on. Now, is the move they've made addressing that problem entirely? I'm not sure. Something I think might have happened is when they lost Nivera on some maps where they were using Nivera. So, for example, on Inferno, they had a lot of problems before Nivera where they didn't know who the Bianca should be. They had a lot of problems with who to make it. They tried it with Shocks, I think, for a bit, and it was just a disaster. They moved to having Nivera and Masuta playing, and then I think Zayu was the Bianca with like Apex people. He talks about this in the HLT podcast. But like that was a map where they like not having Nivera allowed them to rejig the roles around and get to like a system that worked. And now having gone back and not having, I watched some of their Inferno the other day, and you can just instantly see the problems now that Masuta's back to Bianca. It just doesn't work as well, and they're having issues getting banana control and playing late round. So that might be what's going on here. They lose Nivera, they've got to use Masuta and Shocks on all the maps, and then suddenly they're like, okay, we can't plug this gap with our players available. Should we switch out RPK for someone who we think can plug these gaps? So maybe Kyogin will play Bianca on Inferno. I have no idea. But that might be a potential reason. But something you have to think in this sense is like they've kind of lucked out twice with Masuta and Nivera, in my opinion. You never know these younger players are going to work at a top level. And both of them, to some extent, have worked fairly well. And they worked in the system pretty good. And now they're doing it for a third time and trying to bring on a third inexperienced player. He's got skills, but this is like a different ball game. This is a different beast to playing pugs and just shooting people. Like there's so much you have to learn, so many aspects of the game. And as we talked about, the stuff I was just saying RPK might have issues with, like that's really high level stuff. And like you've got to play for a long time to to build up the initiative and like the decision making, all this sort of stuff. So I do question this move. I question whether it was a reaction to Valve rule, removing Nivera, seeing how the 5-man roster was working and deciding it wasn't going to work moving forwards, but a bit perplexing. And yeah, this might be one risk too far. And as you mentioned, we are only a month and a bit from them starting playing RMR events, and presumably this move internally was not made a long time ago. So they've got a lot to practice, a lot of shit to figure out. And if they do arrive at Flashpoint in good form, I think I'll be surprised, to be honest, at this point. And yeah, maybe this is one risk too many. Yes.
Yeah. So that's that awkward call. In terms of other roster madness, we've got MICHU. Rumored, of course, nothing confirmed yet, going over to Evil Geniuses. The rumor is that Tarek is on the way out. That entire rumor, by the way, just stems off a tweet that was just the eyes emoji. That whole rumor comes from
classic.
One
this is the level
tweet,
we're at in esports. this is top quality news.
Yeah. For me, that would be a weird choice of change. I mean, obviously, MICHU was sort of OG's target for a little bit, and then they pick up Flames, who, honestly, for my money, more what they need and less what MICHU would give them. So I think that was a really good call from them. And then MICHU sort of almost feels secondhand. He goes and, EG, obviously, poor run of form recently. They've got to be making some kind of change somewhere. What's the call, right? You've got Obo coming in. That's a start, for Ethan, who's obviously gone off to play Valorant. There was a lot surrounding that. And now potentially bringing in MICHU for Tarek. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest here. Haven't watched a lot of MICHU. I'm hoping you've got a little bit of knowledge behind you because you do tend to watch all the CS in the world.
He played at Flashpoints.
Oh, so you know what you're on about then. Right. MICHU for Tarek, yes or no?
No. I just don't think... I think MICHU to a team like OG could make some sense. I think that would be like a good proving ground for him again, to prove himself as like a top player from when he had some good periods when he was playing on those Polish teams, but he was never sensational in my eyes. He was never, truly incredible. And it just feels like, is MICHU of the caliber? Even though, okay, EG's had a lot of problems. Okay, there's no doubt about that. They've had some big issues, and obviously Ethan leaving, Obo coming in, and some rumors about Tarek, whether they're true or not. They've had some problems. They've fallen a long way down, but ultimately this core of players has played at a top 5 level. They played some sensational Counter-Strike. And even with their issues right now, it just doesn't feel to me like MICHU's of the caliber to be playing on a team like this, at least at the moment in his career. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's just going to be a 6th player and he'll stand in for some events if they have visa problems, which might be a real concern at the moment for some of these, getting constantly flying back between North America and Europe for some of these people. So I don't know. But yes, if MICHU was a starting player and Tarek came out, I'd be pretty surprised. And in terms of MICHU's play, I'm trying to remember. Problem with him at Flashpoint 2 is Envy was such a fucking mess. They had almost no practice. The map was a joke, and calling was really weird. MICHU felt like he wasn't in super comfortable spots, so it's hard to rate him that much. I remember it felt like Thomas was actually probably the best. Thomas and Calix probably felt like the best players on the team at that point. MICHU was one that was just an also ran. Might have been because of his spots, to be fair, but I just don't truly know enough about him as a player. And yeah, it's just an odd move. I don't know what's going on here. I guess we'll see in a few weeks how the roster pans out in the end. But in general, this doesn't excite me that much. MICHU going to EG.
Fair enough. A little harsh, a little scathing, but we like it. And the other sort of big-ish roster move that's happened, I mean, today has just been mental, really. MICHU rumored to join Evil Geniuses, and then fucking Fnatic are like, oh yeah, Flusha's gone, by the way. And sort of this, again, rumored for a long time, right? There was this whole Sunny wants to play with Flusha, wants to play with Automatic thing that started, I remember hearing rumblings of it maybe a month ago. And then Automatic went to Valorant, and it sort of quieted down, and obviously Stunny stood in for FPX for a while, and they looked pretty damn good, and you could see a world where maybe they look to sign him because they're having problems getting their hands on Chris J. And you were like, okay, this isn't going to happen. It's going to fall apart before it really starts. And now they apparently have worked it out. They've said that they've got an org who aren't quite ready to announce it yet. They're, putting pen to paper, letting the ink dry, that sort of thing. But it is going to happen. And what we've got is Sunny, Flusha, Sergej, Esperanto, and interestingly, you mentioned him on Envy, Calix, but more on a trial period from what I've heard. Calix is sort of, he's there, but he's not there, if you get what I mean. It's like a Mad Lions. They've brought him on. If he goes well, they'll keep him. If he doesn't, they'll scrap him and get someone else. Now, this roster is interesting for me is what I'm gonna say. You know, Flusha. Obviously, there's a lot of pedigree here. You know, with Flusha and Sunny, they do provide a lot of pedigree. Sergej's been around the block a few times as well. Esperanto had his moments on crazy, I think it's safe to say, and he did have his moments on that 5 stack. I can't remember who they got signed to next at this point.
Contact.
Oh, it was Contact. Yes, Flashpoint. He had his moments, but he wasn't all that impressive for my money. And then Calyx, who I can't remember who tweeted it. It must have been one of the HLTV guys. They were basically scrolling his stats, and it was year before last, he was having like a 1.1 to 1.15 HLTV rating against top 10 teams in the world. Now he's been scrapping it out in like tier 2 mixes, you know, Turkish just throwing 5 players at a wall and seeing what sticks. And he's been really struggling. He's been in the sort of low 1-0s coming up against, you know, tier 2, tier 3 opposition. And they were saying that he's sort of the key to whether this roster works or fails, right? If he steps back up to that level, if he starts having big series again, then he could really be the glue that brings all these disparate parts together and makes something happen with it. I'm a little intrigued to hear your opinion, because for me, I look at the 5 they've got together, and obviously I knew that Sunny wanted to play with Flusha, and they have managed to make something of it. But it's a weird mix roster, man. It's like they've just gone and picked 5 names out of a hat and gone, yeah, we're going to make this a team.
Certainly is like, this isn't a lineup a GM would build. I don't think this is like the sort of thing a player comes up with, like, this is a great idea. That's at least my initial reaction. Problem with Esperanto is like, I just don't rate him very much as a player. I don't think he has great fundamentals. He's got skills, there's no doubt, and maybe under a good system, good coaching, he could develop into a good player. But particularly when I saw him on Crazy and Contact, like, just plays for himself, and he's super aggressive. And on the desk at Flashpoint 2, I said the Esperanto confirmation bias conundrum, because he's like a player that like shits on like tier 3 teams and then goes and plays good teams, and he just like gets punished for overfacing and getting too aggressive and stuff. So I question how they're going to use him. And the problem is on this team, it's like you've already got so many players you want in the good spots already on the filling out the rest of the roster. Well, am I going to give space to Esperanto and tell Sunny that he can't play the rotator spots? Well, that sounds like a horrible idea. Calyx probably plays best in the rotator spots as well. So it's a really odd mix of players, and they've got no AWPer, which I can spot immediately. Maybe, who on earth? Esperanto, maybe? I think he secondaried a bit on Contact, but yeah, what is going on there with the AWPing situation? Maybe they wanted an AWPer. Maybe that's meant to be boxing instead of Calyx, the Turkish player. I'm not entirely sure, but irrespective, obviously, they announced whatever it was. It must have been a couple months ago now. They were talking about the automatic Flusha Sunny core. That sort of announcement, in my eyes, is we've got a core here, and they wanted to advertise to other players and potentially an org to build around them. That's why they went public and why they did a bit of a show about it. Obviously, didn't pan out. Automatic not even playing CS anymore. Sergej, actually, here's a massive steal. I don't know how they managed to get him, to be honest. Maybe he just likes playing with Sunny. But Sergej was a player that I felt could have played on some really good teams. I think, might be wrong, but Sergej might have had military service stuff.
I think he said something about it.
But maybe that went out the window with COVID. I'm not sure. I have no idea. But I'm pretty certain at least a year ago that was in the air, that sort of thing. So I don't know what's going on there, but this is such a mental mix of players. I'll be very interested to see what org has picked them up. I'm guessing it's not a super big org. I don't know. If I was an org and I knew about CS, I wouldn't pick up this team as this 5. I would probably get rid of 1 or 2 and bring in an AWPer and bring in a better role player to help out Sergej in those role player sort of spots. But this is like a mental mix of players. Like, the reason I'm sort of hesitating here is I only saw this lineup like a few hours ago and I haven't really had a chance to think about it. And I only just realized on air there a few seconds ago that they don't have an AWPer. So I don't know. It's just fucking mental. Like, what's going on? What's happening?
Welcome to CS in 2021, man. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me at this point if Hellraisers turn around and just sign them for shits and gigs after dropping their entire 5 for seemingly no reason. They just decide to ditch their roster. That, interestingly enough, I think that's got something to do with the X-Winstrike guys, but that's a conversation for another day. Yeah, I mean, again, no idea what to make of this 5 who apparently have got an org behind them and are looking to make it seriously happen. I think time will tell again where they sort of spit out. They definitely have got some parts of a solid team. You know, you're saying Sergej, no idea how they got their hands on him. If they can convince him to come back to some of that form that really made you stand up and notice him, right? On the space station? No, it's not that. What was the fucking Turkish org's name?
Space Soldiers.
Space Soldiers, yeah. Space something or other. Yellow logos. Everyone with space has got them. Like that was the form that made everyone stand up and take notice of some of these Turkish players, right? And if he can find that form again with Sergej in tow, bringing the experience of Sunny and Flusha, maybe something happens, right? But it definitely feels like there's a lot of maybes before this team becomes even a remotely serious contender for sort of that, you know, top 20, top 15. They've got great parts. They don't seem to gel. I mean,
the amount of things that have to go right for this to work is like totally unreasonable. Like, not to mention Flusha calling is definitely not a proven quantity. I assume Flusha's calling because we know that Sunny was calling whilst he was in it and helping out the FPX guys for a bit. And then the AWPing situation, how's Esperanza going to work? Is Sergej even in remotely good form? Is Calix just done with playing CS properly after he's played all these months in Turkish teams and went through that envy experience, which probably wasn't great, a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
So it's pretty mental, this. I mean, it's certainly got some good players, so if they get a good org and then it doesn't work, they can change a few out. Maybe that's the long-term aim. Certainly, it might have been the case they just couldn't get the players they wanted originally to round out the roster. I don't know. Ended up in this sort of position, but I have no idea what to expect, and I actually really wonder who signed them, because this is a risk. It's a real risk, and I don't imagine a player like Flusha is going to sign for cheap, super cheap money. So it's not going to be like a godsend equivalent sort of organization that tries to make the shrewd choices and pay a bit less than the big orgs and have good results. So yes, mental. What is going on? What's going on with all of these lineups? They're all a little bit mad at the moment, aren't they? Maybe they're all making changes ahead of the RMR and all that.
Yeah, I mean, we had this discussion off broadcast, right? And I think it's the last roster change, which we will lead into, is sort of Flamey dropping and Bit coming up more seriously. But it definitely feels like we're starting to spin up for the major, right? The wheels are starting to turn, the cogs are being spun up again, and teams are making their changes now to make sure they can qualify for the major. Because obviously, for people who sort of have lost the idea of what's happening with the format and all that crap, I quite frankly don't blame you. We've basically forgotten about RMR events for fucking 6 months, and now we're talking about them again. When Valve first came up with the concept, they said that obviously the more players you lose from a team, I think it's 20% per player change you make, so pretty significant consequences. But as the events get closer to the major itself, they're going to be worth more and more points each time to try and incentivize form and, you know, not have a team who were great a year ago and have now lost 2 of their players still making it to the major and then just being shit. So what's happening is a lot of teams are making a calculated risk at this point. They're looking at probably 2, maybe even 3 more RMRs that people are going to be looking to squeeze in before the major. Those 3 RMRs are probably going to be enough to qualify on their own if you place well in all 3, compared to the lesser points that you got at the back end of last year. So we're getting a little bit of roster mania at the moment. We're getting lots of organizations looking to make the big change that will get them into the major, because obviously we've spoken about it before and it bears highlighting again. Everyone should be focusing on the fucking major. Now, that is the goal for the rest of this year. Obviously, we've got Blast Spring Showdown. We've got Blast. Do they call it Global Final? Something like that.
The new one they just announced.
Yeah, the new one with the massive prize pool that Heroic. Yeah. Go find out. The one that Heroic have just qualified for from winning Pro League, right? But the major is it's the hallmark. World Final, right? Blast World Final. That's got $1 million prize pool. That's also a target. But the major is the major. We're hoping it's going to be on LAN. Obviously, that's COVID dependent. But a major on LAN as the first big event back at LAN, the first event where potentially they can look to get some kind of crowd in, right? Even if it is with social distancing, if it is with vaccination passports, whatever it may be, that's going to be the highlight of the last 2 years if they can pull it off, right? It's going to be huge major in a stadium, crowd noise, players are going to be hyped up to an extent I don't think we've ever seen them hyped up before, to be playing in a fucking shipping container on a stage with some noise cancelling around them. So all of these orgs do seem to be chopping and changing to make the most of the opportunity they've got now, on the basis that they should still be able to earn enough points to qualify. And the last big org that has made the big call, and it's one that's been floating around again, the rumor mill has been spinning for a long time, it's the Flamey Bit situation on Na'Vi, because they were trying Bit on more maps. Flamey, it felt like he was taking on less and less responsibility. It felt like he was being phased out. And Na'Vi have now finally made the announcement that Bit is going to be the player they're looking to for the RMRs. They've said that Flamey is still very much a part of the team. They still very much want to utilize him, but obviously with the Valve ruling and the decision around it has to be a core of 5, they had to make a call, and they've gone for Bit over Flamey. Now, for me, that was the right call. I look at the Na'Vi roster, I look at what they were achieving with Flamey, I look at what they were achieving when they put Bit in instead of Flamey. Obviously, this Na'Vi roster is very simple-centric. It very much is one insane player and then 4 pieces that you try and fit around him to make it work. But when Bit was in, they certainly, to me, seemed more cohesive. He seemed to offer a little bit more on the CT side, specifically on the defense. He definitely felt to me like he offered a little bit more as an anchor on one of the sides, or even as a rotator to try and just play around Simple. And Flamey, I don't know, man. I think he knew it was coming. I think, almost contrary to the Vitality where they kick the youngster, it felt like more and more responsibility and more maps were being tried with Bit, and Flamey was sort of gradually, being phased out, scaled back slowly over time to try and give Bit a little bit more of an acclimatization period, right? Coming into, rather than going from 2 maps to 6, he's gone from 2 to 3 to 3.5. He plays the 4th map occasionally, and now they're ramping it all the way up. And for my money, it's the right call. They've obviously picked the best possible time to make it. I don't think putting Flamey over Bit would have been the right decision. When you have these newer, younger, talented players and you're using them for 2 maps, then you start using them for 3 maps, and he's still performing at the level of Flamey. I think you've got to look at the bell curve, right? Bit's very young. He hasn't got that much experience. They're obviously blooding him in over a period of time, but he's only going to get better, right? That curve is only going to go up. And it definitely feels like Flamey is sort of starting to come down the other side of that bell curve now, where things start to drop off a little bit. You start to rely on, your game sense and your knowledge rather than just that raw aim and that raw ability to frag out in the server. So I think it's the right call at the right time. I don't know. What do you think of it?
Certainly, I've never watched Bit playing in the team, and thought this team looks worse with Bit than Flamey. So at least it's at least a wash. And as soon as it's a wash, and you've got a player in their positions where you've got one that's much younger, much more inexperienced, and presumably only has space to grow, and then the opposite side of the coin, Flamey's played at the top level for a pretty long time now. He's played a variety of roles, played under the same sort of players, under the same leadership core for a long time. You have to just look at that and say, if the major's coming up, we're going to have to lock in a roster, and we're having some issues, why not take the risk on the younger player? Why not try to develop him more? And why not try to look at the flaws in the team and mold him into that, instead of having a Flamey that realistically you might be able to get him to change some traits as he is as a player, but it's going to take a long time, a lot of molding, a lot of coaching. Whereas a clean slate like Bit is, especially on some of the maps who hasn't played them before, you could just look at what you want, what you need. Do you need a more proactive player here? Do you need one that's more passive and safe and lets other players like Electronic and Simple have more space? Do you need someone on T side that just sits back and plays the edges and plays safe? Or do you need someone that gets aggressive? As a coach, that's what you'd be thinking about. And presumably now bringing him in to play all the maps of these RMR tournaments, that's a consideration. And they're probably already thinking about, let's mold him into this sort of player. The only problem I kind of have with this whole situation is it just feels like Bit isn't where was Na'Vi signing, if they really wanted to put the fire under Flamey and have a potential swap in, where was a really high profile pickup? Where was there's so many younger players. You could have got a Gambit player probably before they started having these good results. where was a really, really exciting prospect? Because as much as Bits looks good, he doesn't excite me nearly as much as some of these players on Gambit or some of the Virtus Pro players or even some of the Spirit players. So that's the little bit of the underwhelming thing for me. It's like, if we're going to this is essentially a player change. If we're going to have a player change, I want a really exciting player come in that's going to add a new dynamic, and I don't expect this to play that differently to the Na'Vi with Flamey, put it that way. But yes, I don't know what to make of it. And overall, I bet it doesn't result in that much different results, to be honest. I don't see Bit bringing that much to the team. Maybe they can mold him into the right place, but in terms of fixing all their problems and maybe adding some more structure would be my argument of their biggest flaws. I don't think you're going to see that from this move, but I guess we'll see how it plans out. Presumably they've announced the RMR event for the CIS one, whichever one that's going to be. So presumably they're already gearing up for that and thinking about the RMR events. So the other ones are Flashpoint is EU, and then Summit is NA. Yep. And then I don't know what they're doing about South America and stuff like that. I don't know if they're even getting RMR events at the moment. I don't know. There is an Asia one and there is an Oceania one. I'm sure of that, at least. But I'm not sure about South America. Because to be honest, even if you did RMR stuff for them, the reality is I bet by the end of the year they can't fly. Or it'd be such a nightmare to get them to fly into Europe or anywhere, or get them into North America first. And whatever situation you want to take, it would be a nightmare. I can almost guarantee it. And something I was thinking about the other day is, I know originally when Valve announced RMR, it was kind of a case of you play in the region where you're situated. So some of the NA region is Brazilian teams, or 100 Thieves, now Extremum. They're those sort of teams. So I'm wondering if some of the Brazilian teams are going to play the open qualifiers for Flashpoint probably, and then because that now is their home region, they're all playing in Serbia. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of these Brazilian teams maybe at a Flashpoint, maybe at some of the future RMR tournaments. But now with the RMR tournaments on the horizon, in my eyes, in terms of watching the game, and if I was a competitive, I'd be totally focused on the major, and I'd be seeing these tournaments now as the run-up. So now that we've got the RMR tournaments announced, give me your reaction. It feels like we are back in the major circuit now, when we had a big long break. So when you saw these announcements coming out, are you now excited to be now on the track to Stockholm again?
Yeah, for sure. It's nice to be spinning up again, isn't it? It's nice to be talking about a LAN and a major at that, and not sort of doom and gloom and Rio's been postponed indefinitely and we don't know where it's going to be and we don't know what's happening. So we've got a major, we've got RMRs leading up to it. I think for the first time in a while, in my eyes, obviously RMRs give, they're Valve sponsored events, but I think they give Valve a little more wiggle room in terms of who they pick to operate. Previously, you sort of had qualifiers, and then minor and major would be run by company X. And so they tended to stick to safe bets, right? They stick to organizations they'd worked with before, or they knew had pedigree. Obviously, PGL are actually running the major this time. PGL had Krakow. It was a pretty solid major indeed. They know what they're getting, and I think PGL are also running the Asian RMR. So
they've done loads of those events already.
Yeah, so they've almost got a training ground, right? You've got however many weeks to try out all the cool shit you want to run on broadcast on an RMR event that probably isn't going to get anywhere near as many eyes. It is an Asian qualifier at that. And then bring what you like, ditch what you don't, and make the major this amazing spectacle. And then you've got, Summit and Flashpoint. Obviously, Flashpoint, a little bit difficult for you to talk about because, you work with them, but they're sort of almost Face It now, in my eyes. Face It sort of overarch it, and then Flashpoint is the product that you present to the public. It's a weird one for me, the branding specifically. Obviously, I'm going to sort of just go off on a tangent here. Because Flashpoint, the whole concept, obviously, Thorin's gone from Flashpoint now. I think that's the first point we have to say, right? Thorin took a lot of the responsibility, a lot of the brunt for the product on his shoulders. He was the director. He was the public voice. He was going to be the big cheese, and all accountability, stopped with him. He made all of those tweets about that. He's gone. So he said, I'm not having anything else to do with this product. I think he even tweeted when these teams came out and went, this isn't what I had in mind for Flashpoint. This doesn't change my opinion. I still think it fails as a concept. And it's a weird one. I think Ryan at RBM tweeted it and said, he would have rather the branding be Flashpoint the RMR special or something like that. And I can see his point, right? Because the whole concept of Flashpoint was you have these teams buying in, you have these partners who drop a lot of money. I think it was 2 million. It was 2 million. There we go. Alan's nodding.
I'm pretty sure it's 2 million.
We'll call it 2 million. We may be wrong. We'll put a little asterisk in the corner, but they drop all this money to basically guarantee that they're going to be competing at Flashpoint events. So to then get to this stage where obviously we were discussing it off broadcast, I think before the last veto, sort of what this meant for them, because if Flashpoint was going to be an RMR event, then there was no way they were going to be able to negotiate bringing in partner teams, right? It was going to be how Valve do it, which is they invite the best teams in the world and then you qualify for the remaining spots. So it definitely feels for me like a change of tactic almost. It's meant they've got, the best teams in the world. Don't get me wrong. We've got Astralis, Heroic, Vitality, NiP, Big, G2, FunPlus, FaZe, OG, Fnatic. We've got one more invite slot, and then we've got 5 qualifiers. The best teams in the world are going to be playing at Flashpoint. I think Flashpoint is going to have its best chance yet to showcase what it can be as a product, right? Because that's always felt like one of the biggest hurdles for Flashpoint is the teams were shit, let's be real. But it is definitely a departure from form. So for me, Flashpoint's the weird one. We'll leave Flashpoint at that, because obviously we're just going to leave that. And then we'll go on to Summit, who get the NA one. I like the call. I like the call a lot. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased because I've done a couple of B streams for Summit over the last year or so. It's different. It's going to be a different product. I hope they can bring some more of that casual, laid-back style into online. Obviously, it's very difficult because for those of you who haven't watched the Summit, the format is we're all on a couch. We've got like 6 mics just set up in an array and everyone just chats shit. And then occasionally a player walks in to get some food from the fridge and we'll drag him in to do a broadcast and we'll drag him in to do a bit. And obviously, with the pivot to online, a regular studio broadcast is hard enough to replicate. That is damn near impossible. I hope they'll be able to do something like that because I think it would be really nice to have a different style of qualifier for event for a major, a little more laid back, a little less hardcore serious. Here's the casting. It's all on the line. They need to qualify, and more. These are the NA teams. Obviously, NA struggling a little bit. Let's bring the players' personalities in. Let's make this an advert for the North American qualification side of things and show the NA personalities, the NACS, how it plays out. Let's make this a broadcast to be remembered and a broadcast to put a little bit of a flag in the dirt and go, yep, NA is still here. NA can still be a product worth watching.
Yeah, but I do like the approach of Valve to spread out the RMR tournaments, even in the sense that you could see it from the angle that we've got to think about who's going to run the future majors going into 2022 and beyond. Let's try out these different tournament organizers. Can Summit put on a high, even if they want to have their own feel, you still need to up the production quality. You still need to up a lot of aspects. So can they pull it off? Well, let's give them, the breeding ground to, much smaller level than running an entire offline tournament. But even so, they've got Valve behind them. They've got some good teams. Let's see what they can do with the products. And I'm sure the people that make the decisions at Valve will be watching these tournaments and seeing how it all plays out. I can talk a bit on Flashpoint in general. It's pretty obvious that the quality of games is going to go quite a lot by this decision. You mentioned it, like Flashpoint 2, you're probably looking about 12 teams, and of those 12 teams, I'd say 6 or 7 were reasonably good. Maybe top 20, maybe top 25. And then you just had the bottom end of Envy, Contact, Dignitas. I'm sure I'm missing some others. Gen.G with their stand-in situation. Like, you just shouldn't be having these sort of teams at a tournament that quality. And it was disappointing for everyone that some of those organizations showed up with those lineups. So going into Flashpoint Season 3, that was not going to be a problem with this team lineup. It will be a lot better. And just in terms of the games, it should be a lot better quality. And just from that perspective, I guess the hope is from the guys at Flashpoint that the broadcast now with the games, with the teams, with the storylines, I mean, a big aspect of how it was all set up is they wanted to build in good storylines. And even a reason, if you watch Duncan's video why he left, was that he felt like when he didn't have the top teams around, when he didn't have, and if they're partner teams, you get a lot more access and stuff to filming. It's a side point, but irrespective, when you have the really good teams in the tournament, it's so much easier to build in the good storylines. You can talk about Astralis. I mean, just talking about Astralis now, realistically, they're gunning for a 5th major, and this is like the first stage of the major, essentially, for them. So instantly there, you've got a massive storyline, and obviously, other Flashpoints, you could never build that storyline into the broadcast. So from a broadcasting perspective, for the guys on there, there'll be so much more leeway to talk about those sort of things, to actually drive real hype instead of having to talk about like certain players as if they're incredible when they're just the best we've got or whatever. So yeah, from a broadcast perspective for the Flashpoint guys, that will be the biggest bonus. Will be now we've got high quality teams. What is the product we can put forward? And it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out and how it compares with the other top tournaments, because obviously, everyone's spent a long time watching ESL. Everyone's spent a long time watching Blast. Let's give Flashpoint some really good teams and see how they approach running those games. So that'll be interesting. And then talks about Summit. But yeah, in terms of the other ones, it's just good to see a variety. And you did kind of say there that Valve don't take risks in terms of who they allow to run these sort of tournaments or majors. Not sure I entirely agree, because I do think when PGL got the Krakow major, that point, I don't think, trying to even remember what events they'd run in the past. They did some stuff in 2015 and 16. It wasn't of the caliber of a major. And for them, it might have even been a bit out of their depth in running it. Maybe they pulled off the product pretty well in the end, but from if you just like listen to podcasts and stuff, it didn't sound like it was smooth sailing in the process. Rarely is at events, but yeah, maybe that was a bit of a risk. And Star Ladder for the Berlin major, they might have ran a lot of tournaments, but it's a different kettle of fish when you've got new set design. I mean, the entire stage was something they never ran before, and loads of stuff. So in general, yeah, I think Valve's not opposed to risk taking. I don't think they want a monopoly. I don't think they want a DreamHack ESL running all the big events. So yeah, I'm happy to see this, and I don't know. I hope Blast gets some of the later RMRs. That'd be awesome. I hope everyone gets a good mixture, and by the end we can just see how different people approach what is essentially going to be the same product once we get through the successive RMR tournaments. Hopefully they get a mixture as well, so they get different regions of the different tournament organisers as well. So hopefully by the time we reach the major, we'll have a load of interesting events. And yeah, I guess you get that with the RMR. They do bring a different flair just because you're restricting it to the regions. It's not just going to be another tournament where is it Gambit Heroic? Is Astralis going to find form? It's a bit different. You're going to see some different teams making it in, and yeah, let's just wait and see, I guess, going into the RMR boys. And all
yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. I think there's definitely, as you said, Astralis gunning for it. That 5th major, it's got a little bit of prestige behind it, to say the least, shall we say? That would be
unbelievable.
just incredible. I'm really struggling to come up with the words to summarize what a 5th major would be for them. But looking at some of the other teams, Heroic on life form right now, playing lights out, best CS I think they've ever played as a 5. Can they continue that form? Can they keep building from where they are now for the next 6 months? Will the Vitality moves work? Will this young NIP team start to mature and really start to be a serious contender? And then redemption arcs for the likes of Big, G2, I think FaZe to an extent, with Karrigan and Twist being pulled in. Honestly, Flashpoint 3, the storylines that exist, and this is the first RMR, are insane. The amount of story and backstory and ways you can weave that into a broadcast, I really do feel like they've got the perfect stage to really show off, what they've been trying to do since their inception right now. This is the golden egg, as it were, that they've just unearthed and gone, holy fucking shit, we have got a chance here to really put out an S-tier product. And I have no doubt they can do it as well. And then obviously Summit on the NA side of things as well. Big opportunities across the board. I do echo your sentiment that I really, really hope Blast get a bite at it for sure, because they have been, I think it's safe to say, the highest production quality in the online era. They have consistently been putting out fantastic products. They've consistently been putting out interesting and innovative ways of doing it. Obviously, say what you like about the sponsored segments in between, you know, obviously Scrawny with the skin stuff, Launders with his bits. Yes, they're sponsored segments, but they're different. They're not just let's throw on a video for 3 minutes while we wait for the next thing to start. And we've seen people riffing off it, right? Surf and Chill, Surf and Flex coming into the ESL broadcast, those hype montages for older players that they've been throwing in sporadically as well. It feels like Blast have made the innovation and gone, you know what, we don't just have to show 3 minutes of shit ads for, you know, CPUs and stuff in this break. We can run something genuinely interesting that genuinely makes people want to be here and watch at the same time. And now other companies are going, dodoy, we can run actually interesting crap rather than 3 minutes of ads. And well, in Blast case, sorry, it hits both, right? It hits both criteria. It's an ad for CS money in Scrawny's case, and it's actually a hell of a lot more interesting to watch than, I think CS Money used to have that generic one where it was like a cartoon and the guy would flex his skins so that the guy didn't diffuse. It's a shitload more interesting than that. It's talking to pros about skins. It's something a little bit better, a little bit different. So yeah, I really hope Blast get one, but Flashpoint, big opportunity. I think that's all you can really say.
Yep, and I guess we'll see how it plays out. Well, I think we've touched on all of the topics I wanted to hit on. We covered Pro League, RMR tournaments, roster mania galore. I don't think it's a coincidence that RMR stuff gets announced. Then everyone's like, oh my God, rosters, let's get this sorted. And then, of course, you got the Valve stuff with restricting to 5 players. So it's not a coincidence that all this stuff is happening. But I hope that in a month, 2 months, when we're into the RMR tournaments, when these rosters are playing out, I think that the scene overall maybe is in a bit of a position where we haven't got all the top teams firing on all cylinders. We haven't got all of, you know, we're not quite building to the crescendo. But hopefully, in a few months when these rosters come together, Vitality comes to form maybe, Na'Vi fixes their shit, Astralis gets back to good shape. Like, you know, this could be mega. And then, especially if you want to talk building storylines into the major, like, this is way better than what we used to have in like 2015, 2014. Assuming the major happens and it's on LAN, like there were not storylines like this. There was nothing like this. It was like you had like NIP VP and then Titan and then LDLC, like Fnatic maybe. Like that's all you had really, and then nobody else really mattered. Now we have there's legitimately like 10 teams that could win the major at this point in time. And I mean, it's going to be crazy, isn't it, the next few months. So I think I'm done. You got any other topics you want to hit on, or are we all good?
Yeah. I think we're pretty much good. Obviously, this will probably go out tomorrow, won't it? So I'll be on the ESEA Premier Playoffs broadcast. So if you do want to watch some more
Which
CS
game do you know?
Oh, God knows. I mean, I'm on Tuesday through Sunday, so there's going to be something.
One of the games, put them all on at the same time.
Yeah, why not? Let's just play all 4 games simultaneously. I'll be on one of them anyway. We'll be rattling through that. And I'm sure with the Blast showdown going on in the next week, obviously, you know, when we next record, we'll be able to talk through what's gone on there and potentially what that means for the teams. But I think we've hit just about everything for this week.
Smacked everything, smacked it down. And yeah, that's all the topics. If you've got a good question, chuck it in the comments. Probably won't read it, but you'll enjoy yourself promoting the video. You can tweet in. If you tweet in a hashtag Ask Allan, I'm much more likely to reply, to be honest.
Ruining your own cell, mate. What is this?
I know, I need a CS Money ad, like in the middle of the podcast. If you want to sponsor, I'll put something in the middle. We will sell out to the highest bidder.
Oh, for sure.
And soon enough, we will indeed be hosting our own RMR tournament. Veto RMR. Featuring the Antarctic region or something. You can't get anything better. But that's been an hour 23. We've had some fun, and hopefully we'll be back soon enough to cover the happenings at Blast. Some good teams there, and potentially how some of these crazy roster moves has developed. And I can't wait to see who's AWPing for Flusha and company. We'll catch you next time around.